Hello, pod smashers of the internet, and welcome to another episode of Where Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer. We are your hosts,
Penguin and Termite. I am Penguin.
I am Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games.
That's right, and tonight we are picking up where we left off with our episode on Souls-likes and Roguelikes. In our hubris, we thought that we could cover them both in one episode, but we could not, in fact, do that. And that's to no one's surprise, and so we are fulfilling the prophecy that I made in that episode where I said we probably can split this one up, and we are splitting it up, in fact. So we are talking about Roguelikes tonight. We are going to do some compare and contrast to Souls-likes from last week. So we'll give you a kind of a brief recap of last week's and all that. But
last week?
Not last week. You're right. A couple weeks ago, probably about a month ago total, we did an episode on Souls-likes. And so we might cover some of that again, like in a quick recap. But we are going to focus tonight give our focus to the genre or subgenre, you may say, of roguelikes. Talk about what it is, what kind of characteristics it has, and then we'll do some comparing and contrasting and talk about ways that we want to see that genre go forward, or debate the ways, as the case may be, that we want to see that genre go forward. Anyways, so we will be talking about all of that and more, but we are Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer, so what are you drinking tonight?
Well, I figure I have to represent Star Hill because they are half a mile from my house, and I run by them every day and smell their brew, and it's amazing. And so this was actually packaged on November 2nd, which was a mere 2 weeks before I moved in, and I am now drinking it out of this bottle. It is Snowblind Doppelbock from Star Hill in Charlottesville.
Nice.
It's actually in Crozet specifically. Again,
yeah, I've had that before.
So, yes, this is awesome.
Yes, Termite, everyone remembers you moved.
Yes, I have a lot more to say about the move in a minute. But
okay,
this is a full-bodied, smooth German-style lager with perfect caramel malt flavor for winter. And I don't rarely do this, but this was the second six-pack I bought of the same beer, back to back, from the brewery. And I bought this six-pack and a 4-pack of their Northern Lights, which is like the standard IPA that they distribute everywhere. I've had a million times. That 6-pack and that 4-pack was $17. 10 beers for $17, which brings it to a mere $1.70 per serving. And the 4-pack was in pints.
Awesome. Nice.
Super cheap. It's awesome.
Good for them.
So good beer and cheap.
How's the brew? I've never been to Star Hill itself. Like, what's the brewery like?
It's a big open space for you to sit down. It's kind of like got a huge horseshoe bar, 3 sides all the way around, which is nice. They have a trivia night, and it's very spacious. It's actually a very big room to sit down. Cool. It kind of reminds me of, I think like the Fredericksburg breweries are all kind of tight. This is really open. Yeah, this is a really big space. Yeah,
I mean, it's strange ways, I guess, but it's more like industrial open, not spacious and roomy. I mean, that's Crozet for you, right? Like, I felt the same about Devil's Backbone. It's a huge complex. Mm-hmm. Every brewery I've been there has been like, room to stretch out and stuff. Whereas in Fredericksburg, you're right, and Richmond too, it's all like super tight. So
it definitely does not have like fireplaces and fire pits and like. This Star Hill Brewery is very industrial. It's very rustic.
Cool. So probably more like Strange Ways. Oh, interesting. But
yeah, and it's vibe. Like,
nice.
Yeah.
Well, I am drinking my last, I guess, non-wintry, super wintry beer. This is much closer to something I would drink in the spring, but I had to grab it because it was within my price range, and it was from Ardent. Which is my single. So I'm gonna counteract you and represent Richmond over here.
And
say it's Ardent is by far my single favorite Richmond brewery. I mean, I've gone there with an open mind, like wanting to find a brewery I like better than Ardent, and I just can't. Everything I have from Ardent every time is amazing, and their location is just awesome. So when I saw that they had this, I was like, I'm grabbing it. You know, you guys are listening to this episode between the holidays, right? So Christmas has just happened, and New Year's is coming up. So I'll just say that this is the reason for the Saison for me.
Hey!
Because it's a Saison. I think it has a name other than, it just says Saison twice on it, so I guess it's Saison.
Saison.
Yeah, it's from Ardent, and it's awesome. It is a little bit less sweet than I think I would have liked, or floral. Like, I think of Saisons, I think of like floral, I think of spring flavors. So this might actually be kind of fitting, because it's crisp, almost cider-like, but definitely less sweet than a cider, and more of that kind of bitter, like, bite to it. Mm-hmm. So not quite as bitter as an IPA or any kind of pale ale for that matter. But I mean, I guess it's a farmhouse ale, so it's got that kind of just like root ale flavor and without much of the trappings. But it's good. Mm-hmm. Very complex flavor. Beautiful color. It's golden, amber, like fantastic beer. So y'all should grab it. And that is beer talk. Time for us to talk and catch up. So what is going on, Mr. Mover?
This is I guess we recorded a half an episode before this one, but this is the first full episode in my new digs with a brand new PC and an entirely like full desk and a different mic stand and like same mic, but everything else around me has changed. And it's kind of cool. Like stuff's working and coming together. In fact, I will share my little tidbit story about my entirely new PC. And I guess I have to make some concessions about my PC Master Race hatred. I still hate PC Master Race.
Come out. The Master Race thing is mostly tongue-in-cheek. You seem to apply your hatred of the elitism of PC gaming to PC gaming as a whole.
Right.
And that, I think, has softened. So
it has. So I ordered this thing. I want to spend zero effort on a PC. That's where I start. That was my starting point. I need a new computer because mine is old. It's like 9 or 10 years old. It is not dying, but the hard drive is shot, and I'm not going to replace the hard drive and go through the hassle of like reinstalling the operating system, backing up my files, and getting everything to work again without it was easier for me. I want a new computer, but also newer technology, better processors. I want to be able to stream. I noticed that there were some problems with streaming on my old PC where frames were getting dropped, and sometimes like our Sea of Thieves stream was a nightmare. And so I can't really render video games on the PC and stream them at the same time. So all of that motivation went into my desire to buy a new computer. And I did. I went to nzxt.com. They used to sell just cases, but they now sell full builds. They sell pre-builds. They are already decided for you. You just go click on them. And I was like, I want a streaming PC. And I want the middle of the road one. I don't want the weak one. I don't want the super expensive one. Just give me the middle of the road one. And I hit that. And a couple of days later, I got an email notification that it was shipped. And then 5 or 10 days later, it arrived. And it came in a box by itself, just the tower, no monitors, keyboard, or mouse, because I didn't need all that. I just needed a computer. And I did not want to think about min-maxing all the individual pieces. I didn't want to like increase the RAM speed here and decrease the motherboard here and make a concession on the processor for the... I just wanted the thing to work.
You wanted the thing, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And pulled it out of the box. It was very well packaged. I did it once over because I'd seen some horror stories online of like some cables coming loose and shipping and stuff. So I did it once over, make sure all the cables were connected and tight. I plugged it in. I booted it up. Windows was pre-installed. I logged into my Microsoft account and it pulled some of the files that I had staged for backup off the cloud. So my desktop was the same. It worked. First boot, first try. No kinks or issues. So
I realize that's like 90% of the population's experience with PC.
Yeah, I guess so.
Like, because most people buy them prepackaged from Dell or HP or whatever. Like, it's the same service. It's just more, I guess, corporatized towards a specific brand.
Yeah,
but like, I mean,
this doesn't have any of the bloatware or the antivirus stuff. That like
great, even better.
Yeah, you get a PC from Costco, and I would spend like an entire day just uninstalling and ripping stuff out. I'd probably just reinstall the operating system, and that would be a pain. I didn't want to do that. Remember, zero effort. So I knew NZXT had none of the extra bloatware. Zero. It's a raw, fresh Windows installation, and that's exactly what it was. And so I installed the Xbox app knowing I'm a Game Pass Ultimate subscriber, and I could play some games on my new 3070 Ti. I did a little hardware scan, set everything to ultra. I was like, okay, next. I don't want to look at this. I don't want to look at this. I don't want to spend time tweaking anti-aliasing and changing the level of detail and the draw distance and max frame rate, triple buffering, VSync. I don't want to care about this stuff. I want it to just work. And I did. I clicked next, and I jumped into a game, and it picked up right where I had left off on the console, and it works. It all just worked, and it worked flawlessly. 2 screens, 1440p, 160 hertz refresh rate, and it was gorgeous, and it runs at 120 frames per second with all the settings maxed out, and I don't have to tweak it, and it was absolutely fantastic. And so I continued to install more Xbox games. I installed Steam. I ran 3D Mark, and I did some benchmarking because I didn't have to mess with anything, and I wanted to see how good it was. And that, I guess, is what people refer to as PCs that work, and I've not had any issues with this thing since. Like, I've installed Streamlabs, I've installed Discord, I installed Slack, I've recorded several things on the podcast, I've done lots of things on this computer already.
Yeah, and those services have been around for a long time, but not so long that, like, in the heyday of our PC gaming, it was still in vogue, I would say, to build your own PC. And the enthusiasts, the real ego trippers, and I'll admit I was one of them, like to build the PC because they like the troubleshooting and they like the complications and they like being able to say, I did the hard thing and built it myself. But even the vast majority of PC gamers, I would say these days, they just like they go to a place like, Newegg or something, and they build it. They have it pre-built. Not pre-built. Some of them are pre-built, but they have them also just, they click and they're like, I want this, and it'll tell you if it's uncompatible, and they'll ask you, do you want us to put it together for you, make sure it works? And you're like, yeah, pay a little bit extra premium, and then boom, comes in, and yeah, you plug it in, and it works. So
yes,
it's only the real enthusiasts
yes,
that like to get the parts, put it all together, and then, waste hours and hours, realizing what beep codes on the motherboard are indicating what specific failures.
I'm triggered.
I love it and I hate it. I love it because there's the troubleshooter in me that naturally is drawn to that. I mean, I do it for a living, so I got to get some satisfaction out of it. But then it's also tedious and annoying, and that's not always what you want. Sometimes you want your thing to arrive, your entertainment to arrive, and you want to start being entertained by it immediately when you plug it in.
Yes.
So
to create.
Yep. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you have at least broadened your perspective, and playing games or doing things, entertainment-y things on a PC can be extremely satisfying. Cool. Well, PC gaming can be definitely closer to one of our favorite things now, but...
Doing this podcast is our favorite thing. Favorite things, a segment of our show where we talk about something fun and we are digging this week that enriched our lives, or we had a great experience.
The intention here is that, maybe there's some kind of nugget that you can pull out of it where you can be inspired to go out and find your next favorite thing, whether it's inspired to find something like it or to find the literal thing that we have shared. So my favorite thing is actually something I can't tell you yet, because my actual favorite thing is related to our gift exchange, which we haven't done yet. We're recording things in sort of an interesting order, but just know that we recorded this episode before the gift exchange that we did last week. So if you didn't listen to the Christmas episode last week or didn't watch our Christmas live stream, then go check that out if you want to hear more about Penguin's actual favorite thing, because it is directly related to what will happen in the gift exchange. So that's super vague and probably has you incredibly either excited or nervous. You're like par for the course with Penguin.
Yep.
Dang it, but am I so predictable? Next year, I just need to get you like a game code emailed to you and be like, suck it.
Yeah.
So my favorite thing in place of it this week is, for us, where we are now in the month of December, it's not quite the holiday yet. We just had Thanksgiving and everyone's kind of getting ready for the holidays, and all that preparation is a blast. It's fun. I love every bit of it. But it's also really frustrating sometimes. So my weekend was filled with like trying to troubleshoot Christmas lights and then running out and getting Christmas lights. And I got a tree, and that tree turned out to like probably have needed a good hose down because it had pollen or dust or mold spores, something that caused me to have just an awful night that night with like, I was playing Mass Effect and like my tears, like my eyes were like streaming tears and my nose was running, and it was had nothing to do with Mass Effect. It had everything to do with the living being that I brought into my house, the living plant that I had offended, I suppose, by bringing into my house. It's gone now. The reaction is stopped. So whatever contaminant we have dealt with properly, I think. Nevertheless, all that's just to say, one of the great joys in my life has been bringing the joy that I experienced around the holidays to my child, but the amount of work that goes into that is frustrating. So as a treat to myself, as a present to myself for putting forth the effort and being a good dad and having to swear my way through holiday joy, I got myself where gaming goes to grab a vape. I grabbed a disposable vape pen, just like I did at the birth of my daughter. I think I talked about that back in August. Or September, I mean. And I've been enjoying that as sort of a way to kind of like relax. I just, forces me to get out onto the porch, out of the house. And
who'd you do that with?
Just myself, man. Just a way to just get out and just be to myself, force myself to be alone with my thoughts and a vape pen. And it's super relaxing, great flavor. The brand is called like Luxo. It was about $5 cheaper than the competitor in town. I went to a different store in Ladysmith and found it like about $5 cheaper with 500 more puffs. And the flavor is awesome. It's like a watermelon mint. So if you're not into like artificial watermelon flavor, then don't get it. But if you're into like sweet minty stuff, it's really good. So that is my favorite thing.
Woo! I had a very similar outdoorsy experience as my favorite thing. But living in this new community here, all of my neighbors have been wonderful in getting to know and talking with and like having wonderful exchanges and friendly, and everyone's approachable. There is a fire pit that's right in the middle of the community, and on a random Sunday afternoon, There was some work being done to collect all of the firewood and recover it in a fresh tarp and like rearrange it and get it all like straightened because it'd become a mess over time. And so they were doing that outside. And in the midst of that, there was a bunch of wood that was misshapen or really big and awkward. And they're like, let's burn it all. So they started a fire pit, and there must have been 5 to 10 people around in a rotation the entire afternoon. And my wife was at home, and she had some things that she wanted to get done inside. So while Jude, my baby child, was sleeping for his nap, I went outside. My older son, Sam, was running everywhere, playing with kids. He was totally occupied. And I grabbed a beer, and I walked out and just sat next to the fire pit and like enjoyed talking and having good conversations with folks over the next like 2 hours while Jude napped. And it was absolutely wonderful. And it's like so organic. I didn't have to like call 10 people and say, hey, can we meet at this fire pit at this time for this many hours? Let me make sure I get a sitter. Let me make sure I check with my wife. None of that. It was just, let me walk a few steps down the walkway, and I'm sitting at a fire pit with a bunch of friends and like drinking a beer and having a good time. And then when Jude woke up, my wife texted me and I was like, all right, I'm back in. I got to go get the baby. And then I brought him outside, and I had to watch him a little more. So it wasn't as relaxing, but I was still like outside. I was still around, and it was so cool. And I have never experienced anything like that in a neighborhood with neighbors in my life. And so that is my favorite thing.
All right. Awesome. Well, that leads us to our next segment, which is DLC. DLC stands for downloadable content. It is a fun discussion or game or gimmick or whatever that we have. It is a conversation you wouldn't normally have about video games. And I was kind of inspired by actually the DLC of our Souls-like episode. But, again, we still thought at that point out of hubris that we were going to be doing roguelikes. So when we talked about roguelikes, we talked about how kind of did a reverse of this DLC. And that DLC was like what holiday characters, like from all the various holiday stories out there, what kind of video games what kind of games do you think they'll play? Roguelikes or Souls-likes or blah, blah, blah. Which ones would be most interested in it? This is kind of the reverse of that. And basically, I'm gonna key you all into a little secret. Everybody asks how, it's a Christmas secret, right? How does Santa deliver all those presents in one night? Well, to everyone, all the children in the world, right? And the answer is that he's caught in a roguelike time loop and has to do it over and over and over again. But he broke the time loop this year, guys. Just a couple days ago, Santa broke free of the time loop and didn't have to do it anymore this year. So we had to call in a replacement for Santa this year. So what roguelike character from various roguelike games do you think would be the perfect Santa replacement in order to deliver the presents to all the children?
Ooh, I'm not as like up to speed on roguelikes. I know
you might have to like look it up, but like I'll let you look it up and I'll give my answer. So between the roguelikes I have the most experience with are Returnal, obviously, and Hades. I don't think Zagreus, as much as I love Zagreus, though, I don't think he'd be a good Santa replacement. He'd be too focused on like looking good and clever quips, and he'd get distracted by having conversations with other figures of lore. So between the two of them, I'm gonna go and even like Enter the Gungeon, all the Enter the Gungeon characters that we played as, like they're all too like it's almost like it's too random. They're all the tools they have at their disposal are just too random. So between all of them, as much as she's probably descending into madness, I'm going to go with Celine from Returnal because she is the most professional of them all. Despite, again, her like descent into madness, she's still a dang good astronaut, astronaut, and knows her way around the equipment that she needs, that she would need to accomplish the task. She'd find it, discover it, the tools that she needed to deliver all those presents, and then suffer through the time loop. She's already probably crazy, so the time loop I don't think would bother her as much as maybe it does Santa. And she's my answer.
I am looking at a bunch of Souls-like games, and some I've played, and some of roguelikes. Sorry,
right.
That I've played, and some that I haven't. And it looks like Spelunky.
Oh yeah, that counts.
The main character, very cutesy cartoon aesthetic. It's exploration, it's puzzle solving. Mm-hmm. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on there that I feel like would be applicable for a Christmas gift.
Yeah,
distribution in mass.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go with that. And I don't know what the main character of Spelunky is named.
Sure.
It might not have a name.
Maybe it's Spelunky. I don't know.
Cool.
That is DLC. So we want to hear your thoughts. If you're a roguelike fan out there, we want to hear what character, time loop, roguelike character would be best suited, or any video game character for that matter, would be best suited to deliver presents in Santa's absence on Christmas Eve night. And Termite, where can they share those thoughts if they have them?
You can find us at 80-bit Podsmash, 80-bit Podsmash. That's our landing websites with links to all of our social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, and Twitter, as well as a Discord server and the links of all of our show notes where you can find us however you would like. You can rate us. You can rate us. You can leave a review across all of the various podcast platforms.
Apparently,
outlets.
There is reviews you can now leave on Facebook because Facebook keeps telling me to tell people that there's reviews.
Oh,
so if you're a Facebook user and have been wanting to show us some love, then I guess do that. That would help.
Yes, please show us lots of love by giving us a review on your favorite podcast platform of choice: Spotify, iHeartRadio, What's the other one? They're all gone.
Stitcher?
There's Google Play. There's
Google
Apple
Play.
Stitcher. That's the one.
Yeah.
That's the one that gave me the Stitch with Stitcher. Yeah, Google Play and Apple Podcasts. You can give us a review across any of those. So please check us out. If we are not on a platform you would like us to be, let us know. There is an RSS feed link. You can throw that into any third-party podcast app of your choice, and you should be able to get us there. All those things and more at 80bitpodsmash.com. And be sure to check out our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/80bitpodsmash. We will have already streamed the Game Awards, and we don't know what that is because this is recording before that. So I hope that was a great time.
Streamed after that. There should be a stream on there of our gift opening, as I had previously mentioned. So if you listened to that last week and wished, oh man, I wish I could have seen them. Well, you can go back and watch us open those presents because that should still be on Twitch Replay and YouTube by this point.
Yes. So go check us all out. All of those things, 80bitpodsmash.com, twitch.tv/80bitpodsmash, and our Discord link is there in all of our show notes. So go check us out.
Sweet. I don't want to squander this time that we are ahead, so let us jump right in to our main topic. We are picking up where we left off with Souls and Rogues, and we're going to talk about roguelike video games, roguelike subgenre. So brief recap, last week we talked a lot about this idea that like roguelikes and souls-likes are kind of like subgenres that you can apply to other genres, or not even subgenres, but like maybe the opposite of sub is super. So like super genres where you can kind of apply them to multiple different kinds of genres. So even within the like similar elements of games, you know, that are roguelike, you even within that, like you have variety of like 2D platformers or top-down dungeon crawlers, or in the case of Returnal, third-person shooter, horror shooters, right? Like Metroidvania, right? Like, so it's got a lot of, it's kind of like you take the thing and you apply it. So when we talked about Souls likes to start, Souls likes are they're kind of defining elements or the idea of like, highly punishing, enemies come back when you are trying to find checkpoints in the world to progress through it. You get to bosses, and kind of meat of the game is like getting to and defeating the bosses. And sometimes they have sort of progression systems, sometimes they don't. But it's sort of a slow, methodical, like plod through this challenge kind of vibe to it. And there's obviously a lot of variation even within that genre, but those are some of the kind of defining elements there. And so now, in comparison and contrast, we're going to talk about roguelikes. So we're going to focus specifically on roguelikes themselves and talk about their defining features. And so we'll start there, and maybe a little bit of brief history as kind of where they come from. So let's talk about it. What are roguelikes?
Well, it started named after an ASCII name in 1980 named Rogue. The term of roguelike picked up in the early 90s after that. Like you had mentioned, it is a genre-defining elements are looping gameplay, starting over when you die. The original 1980 Rogue really was like when you die, you lost absolutely everything.
Oh,
It
yeah.
started over as if you had first booted the game. Like there was nothing carried over.
When you
Procedural
think about
generation.
it, like if you think about the life system in video games like Castlevania or even Mario, like if you take the lives out of it, and even when you run out of lives, you start over. You lose everything and have to start from the beginning. So like this, I would personally define those as more arcadey, but it's really, really close, very close in a lot of ways. It's like you have more times than one to mess up, but if you mess up too many times, you're done. You start over.
I know a lot of those games had scores. So in arcades, like you would fight to get the high score. And so if you did die, you could start over and you'd start over with a fresh score. But there was this weird loop of playing over and over again just to try to achieve the best score.
Right. So
which
this kind of
is
comes
kind of
from
your
that.
carryover.
Yeah.
Maybe. But this really was like nothing.
I mean, it was just like to get to the end of the game, you have to like succeed without dying. It's basically the idea.
Exactly.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And then, so procedural generation of maps and enemies upon restart. So the maps look a little differently. Each room is Diablo really made this mainstream, like in the grand scheme of things. Returnal had this as well, where it's just like different combinations of rooms. A room is the same room. It's just in a different location.
Has the same elements, has the same types of enemies, but you're not going to fight the same things in the same order each time.
Right.
And you're not going to face the same challenges, and there may be different traps or obstacles. The configuration of the room may look different. The kinds of treasures and stuff in the room are always going to be different. And that's procedural generation right there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they have progression elements, but the original Rogue does not. In fact, there are probably some diehard Rogue fans out there that are saying that no, technically Roguelike has no progression elements because the game Rogue didn't. So games that are trying to be similar to Rogue are roguelikes, and games that have progression elements like Hades and Returnal, they're roguelite. So roguelikes and roguelites, we are just going to call them roguelikes for simplicity here. But the idea is that, like, even if there are progression elements, they're limited. You don't keep everything. And that's one of the ways we'll talk about they differ from Souls-likes, is Souls-likes, the only thing you really lose is your currency / experience. They're kind of tied together in Souls-likes more often than not. And so you lose some stuff, but you keep all your weapons, all your upgrades, all your levels, all of your powers, all of it. You keep it all in Souls-likes. Roguelikes tend to let you keep some things, but for the most part, roguelikes tend to take away more than they give. Upon death. And then, just like Souls-likes, they tend to be punishing and challenging, but similarly, they have that sort of tough but fair mentality. Sometimes. I would say roguelikes tend to be a little bit more, because they mesh well with games with like bullet hell genre and stuff like that. They can tend to be a little bit more, sometimes closer to first-person shooters, I would say, in some of their like precision requirements. So, cool. All right. Some roguelikes there are some features that are commonly show up in roguelikes, but not all roguelikes have them. So things like limited checkpoints. Returnal, for example, had a really big checkpoint right in the middle of the game. And then Hades, for example, has difficulty adjustments. I don't know of many that have like the straight up difficulty sliders, but I know that Hades, for example, has the God mode where you can basically, like, every time it still makes you die, but every time you die, you get a little bit stronger each time, to the point where it eventually becomes powerful enough that doesn't trivialize it, but makes you confident that you can keep going. And then, again, some of them have like either currency or equipment or abilities retained after death. Some of them include this idea of like unlocking things for the item pool. I think both Enter the Gungeon and Returnal had that, where it's like, oh, I did something in the game, I unlocked. They still want to give you the feeling of unlocking a treasure, but instead of like giving it to you permanently, it's like, oh, you now have the chance of getting this treasure or gun or whatever going forward.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a common thing in roguelikes. So, cool. Anything else? Any other that you can think of? Any other defining features there that kind of are common across all or many roguelikes?
No, I think you covered it.
We did it together.
Yes.
So, all right, innovations and impact of roguelikes. What do you think that this genre or subgenre or super genre, whatever you want to call it, has given to the industry?
It allows a unique style of gameplay that is both classic arcade mixed with modern storytelling, which normally would be like a very linear kind of progression. But the classic arcades were quarter fiends where you were supposed to die, and then they're having to think innovatively about to marry those two ideas. I think we're getting a lot of cool different types of games, like Enter the Gungeon specifically is a very arcadey feel with the perfect roguelike elements that you would get, but also kind of tells a cheeky story that you would get in a single player. In fact, most roguelikes that I do play, I just wish I didn't start over when I died. Like, I wish I could just have it continue and keep going, because like I want to continue experiencing the game without starting over. So I thought that's kind of a unique, it's actually an innovation of roguelikes, because they are doing that. They are telling stories, but also still staying true to what it is. I think it's also innovating new ways of how to explore difficulty in video games in general. It's taking that Nintendo hard idea and running with it in a little different way than like Souls-like has, where instead of just super tight precision controls, elements of RNG of like, what kind of weapons and equipment are you going to find this time? The procedurally generated nature of the maps allow you to have like different experiences every time. Hopefully it's lucky, and all of that can be infuriating if you just want to finish the game, because it could be, not. And that's how it was with Returnal. So I think...
I think that I mean, you said difficulty, you said the innovation difficulty, and I didn't bring this up in the last episode when we talked about Souls-likes, because it wasn't as relevant. to those, but I mean, God mode from Hades, I think, is the solution. I think it's the perfect middle ground between what we're talking about, right? Because I always talk about how like death is baked into these games are meant like you would not understand Returnal, what Returnal was trying to do if you didn't die over and over again, right? Because you're supposed to have that feeling of being caught in this loop. And then for reasons that I won't spoil, there's like a midpoint story beat that makes you go, oh my gosh, what? And it's directly tied to that idea of dying over and over and over again. So it means something. In Hades, it's similar. It's a similar thing. You're trying to escape the underworld. You're trying to get out of your father's oppressive rule and authority, and you're trying to rebel and just find your mom. And it's like that goal you keep getting close to only to get taken away. It's meaningful. It has a role. So in Hades, they answer that perfectly by being like, you know what? We still want you to die, but we're going to make it a little easier for you each time. We're going to make it a little bit like with just a default passive like damage reduction. So that way you have the hope and you have the, like for the people who just are having a hard time with it, it's like, I have at least this sort of assurance that eventually I'll have a better chance of seeing the end because eventually I'll take such little damage that like I can probably make it through, right? So I think that's a really good solution. I think Souls-likes would benefit from something like that, where if you just die over and over again, maybe it's only specific to that boss that you're stuck on, but like each time you die from a boss, there should be a mode you can toggle where it's like, okay, they make that boss do a little bit of less damage each time until you're able to get it down, because there's that like it still has that feeling of overcoming the challenge and getting at it. I mean, the reality is that like you can get up to 80% damage reduction in Hades, and I never went higher than like 60. So like eventually, because of what happens in all these games, they kind of teach you how to play them. Like eventually you pick up on the patterns and you find ways to do it most effectively. The fights, and that totally happened in Hades for me, and never really reached that max cap on damage reduction. So, but yeah, you're right. Any other impacts, innovations you think?
I mean, it's a new genre, so like the impact on the gaming industry is we have roguelikes now.
We do. Yeah,
I guess that's why we're talking about it to begin with. But it should go without saying. Like it's obvious, but it also we should say that like we have a genre.
Yeah, the answers I had were things like, obviously they redefine what progression is. The idea of progress is not, I mean, and Souls-likes did this to a lesser degree, but roguelikes have actually been around a lot longer, just not as popular. But they changed what, progression doesn't have to be like, all right, cool, I made it to, I'm playing Mass Effect right now, so that's fresh on my mind. It's like, cool, I, played this many hours and I made it through this much percentage of the game's content, right? With roguelikes, it's like actually the amount of content in the game is a lot lower than any other game. If you were, amazing and blew through it the first time, many of these games would be like 3 to 5 hour games because they're meant to be, they kind of pad their length. One could argue they pad their length with the difficulty, right? With the fact that you're dying and doing it over and over again.
They kind of do.
They do. I mean, they do, but they make it interesting in different ways, right? So they make it, so that like the gameplay is sort of the gameplay, and the variation within the gameplay is the draw, and that's what keeps you going. So we kind of talked about this in Souls-likes too, where it's like what makes each run or loop interesting is the fact that your gameplay changes, right? It's almost like you've got a whole new build because you're just using what you have available. So you may be fighting the same enemies, and the procedural generation helps with this too, because it's not like the exact same map every time, but like you're still like, the gameplay is the draw, is the attraction. There is like these games are usually immaculately designed from a gameplay level because they have to be, because the content is repetitive, but it feels less repetitive because each loop or each session is kind of fresh. So it totally changes like the way that gamers, I think, perceive of like, what does a play session look like, right?
Yeah, Returnal definitely explored that.
Right, that was a big criticism of Returnal, though, right? Because like Hades, like most modern roguelikes, like the runs take like 30 to 45 minutes.
Yep.
But with Returnal, it could be like hours and hours of a run. So without that suspend feature, it made you feel like you had to. So they've included the suspend feature now. It's available in modern Returnal, but at the time when it first came out, it was a big criticism. So, I mean, Hades, I can blast through a run of it in like 25 minutes.
And
like all the way to the end.
It should be.
The boss.
Exactly. It's just quick.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's approachable.
Yep. So it's different in the way that they like handle things. So
that's like the nuance within the genre.
Absolutely.
Each game's going to be different.
And that's how they innovate, right? So they're innovating. What they're adding is they're sort of master classes in like developers. I think all developers should be playing Souls-likes and roguelikes just to see how those games handle gameplay. Because like if more developers took the lessons learned as far as the gameplay design goes, we'd see just incredible experiences across the board. And the reality is that's what's happening, right? Because they are popular genres, and they are having, we talked about it with Souls-likes, is they just like that combat or that storytelling, that environmental storytelling, that like emotional story depth and that interplay of like asynchronous multiplayer with the idea of like community building, all that is like now the like default for most games. Some of those elements are all in so many games. And I think the roguelikes too, like that tight combat, that really good feeling of control and precision and variation of build gameplay, and that idea of rewarding you with even temporary rewards, all of that has sort of permeated into all of the gaming industry, for better or for worse in some cases. But I mean, think about there's roguelike elements in like battle royales too, right? Like you go and you get temporary upgrades, right? That temporary upgrade thing.
It is. Yeah. And then there's that element of the battle royale franchise is now bled into games like Back 4 Blood to its detriment. Like yeah. Or you have equipment that you lose every single time, but you can kind of build up each time you do it.
Yep. So sweet. All right, let's compare and contrast. So this is the question we had to skip last time because we didn't get to roguelikes. So let's look at these genres. So refresh your mind. Again, we kind of talked about Souls-likes a couple weeks ago. We're talking about roguelikes now. But I really want this whole point of this episode, as originally conceived of, was supposed to be this question, which is, what do these two genres have in common, and what are their notable differences? So straight up compare them and contrast them.
Wow. I mean, I'll go with what they have in common, because it's the things that I've lumped these two games into a very problematic genre for me, is because they're difficult.
Yeah.
And they require a lot of time. They're actually not that long, but the difficulty makes them longer and harder barrier of entry. Like, difficult to approach.
I always find I still find it baffling that you jumped into Returnal and beat it and are still resistant so much to Souls-likes. Like, you haven't picked up a single Soul. I mean, you've picked up a Souls game once, and it was Neo, as you've mentioned.
Which apparently is bottom of the barrel. Is pretty bad.
Oh man, it's so hard. I have a hard time talking about Neo because it is so beloved by so many Souls players. There's like some people consider Neo better than Dark Souls.
Really?
In many ways, yeah. There's a big Neo following out there, even among the FromSoft community. But I hated it. And I have many friends who have agreed with me that they love From Software's Souls stuff, but Neo somehow, for some reason, just like is either love it or hate it, I think. But anyways, like, I do find it funny that you're like, I think the same feeling and satisfaction you got from Returnal, you'd get from Dark Souls, personally, I think.
Yeah, and you're not wrong to question that, because it is weird. But the only answer I have is that Returnal was made by Housemarque, and I've played Housemarque games, and they're extraordinarily fast-paced, bullet hells, and like ridiculously fun. Also very hard, but there's something about them. They're very unique. They're such arcade experiences in a modern world that you don't see. Like, I just fired up Nex Machina like 2 weeks ago, and I was blown away by how much fun it was immediately. Stardust HD is phenomenal.
Yeah.
What's the side-scrolling plane game that?
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super fun. So like Returnal had all of that. Like, I saw it when I was watching the gameplay videos. I was like, this has that element of ridiculous fun, super fast-paced action, third-person shooter, and it looked like I could handle that. I don't know. There's something different from that than there was the very methodical melee combat combination of parrying and dodging, countering and rolling, and all of those things that you do in a Soulsborne.
You love it in Jedi Fallen Order, God of War.
Yeah,
I know they're easy and more approachable experiences. I get it. I get it that that's the draw for you, but the DNA is there. You know what I mean? It just requires a little bit more.
And I guess Returnal didn't really have, like, when you died, you didn't lose anything but that run. Like, there was no...
No, I gotcha. Yep.
The Dark Souls, or like the Souls-like idea of actually losing. If you've played for a long time, you killed a bunch of enemies, you have like this currency of whether it's experience or whatever you want to call it to like upgrade your character that you, quote, cash in at the next bonfire. If you die before you get there, you lose that. And like having to chase your body back to like reclaim some of that.
Right.
It's like,
not
to
as
me,
bad as you think, though, because like it's because you can spend it, right? You actually begin to realize that the gameplay loop of that game is like, you know, I'm going to actually kill things up to a controlled point And then, there's going to be breath points where you're basically like, okay, cool, I should, you're either going to get to a point where you're like, I'm going to either push forward or I'm actually going to head back to a bonfire so I can go spend these points that I've got and make it easier the next time I come back here. So there's very much a sort of like, you kind of make decisions as you go. Sometimes you make the wrong call. Sometimes you do get blindsided by things, and there are points where you're just like, no, I lost so many souls. But, and that's for as many of those moments that suck, there's also so many ways where you can just deliciously exploit the souls farming. Like, there are farming spots in those games where you're like, okay, cool, I'm going to put a podcast on and grind the heck out of some souls, then come back to this and be like 20 levels more powerful than I should be. So all of those games have like spots where you can kind of exploit the soul farming system, at least in my experience. And so it's not as bad as you think. I actually found it way more punishing in Returnal, personally. Having been playing Souls-likes for, half a year up to the point when Returnal came out, I found Returnal shockingly more punishing than any game I'd ever played at that point, including later Hades. Like, Hades does not feel as punishing as Returnal. Hades actually has like a talent tree system where you invest points in permanently to like permanent bonuses and boosts.
Yeah, I do want to play Hades.
The only thing Returnal had was the weapon traits that you kept between each run, and the like item pools that you unlock. So I focused on those and eventually reaped the benefits of it. But it was very, very much like ripping a Band-Aid off in Returnal for me, in regards to like, I've played games like this before and nothing has taken away as much per death as Returnal has. Plus, couple that with the length of those runs, and it definitely took some getting used to for even me. So that's why I say, like, as someone who's played them both, I'm like, Termite, you got through Returnal, and that has been one of the hardest experiences of games I've ever played, and yet you're like, I won't go through souls. Yeah, it's funny. So, anyways,
but you're a good segue actually, because we've talked on like the recursive elements of both genres. The next thing they have in common is like you have to repeat a lot. So I talked about like you die in Soulsborne games is actually, I don't want to do that. That was the most frustrating thing to me about Returnal, is having to redo and redo.
Just the idea of fighting a boss over and over again, like it can be really fun and satisfying, but there are also points where you're just like, I've done this fight so many times and I'm just not getting anywhere. So whether it's just the single fight or in the absolute single worst spot of any Souls game, there's the hero's path, I think, is a place in Demon Souls where you do have to get through one of the hardest, most terribly designed levels of any video game, I think, ever.
Yikes.
Only to get to a boss that is super gimmicky. If you actually get to the boss, he's super easy if you know the trick. If you don't know the trick, he's super hard. And I can't imagine dying to that boss only to have to go through the hero's path over and over and over again is just wow. So, because there's no shortcuts in that one. That's one of the few ones that doesn't have a shortcut to the boss. And it's also one of the worst designed levels. And just like, oh man, guys. Yeah, no, I get it. That kind of recursion can be really interesting sometimes. There has to be built in some kind of relief system, either checkpoints, shortcuts, or whatever. Because otherwise, it just gets demoralizing at certain points. That combination of recursion and difficulty are like the bread and butter of both of these genres for sure.
And recursion is different from repetition because it's like, well, in computer science, it's a function that calls itself directly with modified parameters, maybe. So the function's happening over and over again. And those modified parameters in a video game for roguelikes would be something that you carry forward, or a procedurally generated something's different, but you're still doing the same thing. It's still the same function. It's just like, it's a little bit different than repetition because it does modify down the chain. And what's weird, and they kind of hijacked recursion, what's not true in a roguelike is the unwind of the function calls is like when you start getting nested into recursion, it's like each function has a return, and those returns have to like they call it unwinding, but it's really like the stack popping off. I'm really digressing into computer science terminology here. But
fascinating. I'm interested. I'm sitting here being like, let's have a conversation about this later because I'm drawing all kinds of parallels. But yeah, I don't know how much of this is interesting.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell our audience that like recursion is not something you can sub out with repetition. They are two different things. Repetition is just like repeating the same thing over and over again, which kind of what recursion is doing, but recursion modifies the parameters that get sent into a function. So
Which actually is more applicable to both genres,
yes,
at least in their
exactly.
modern design. I would say that like Rogue,
the original Rogue was
more.
repetition.
The original was way more repetition.
Yeah.
Now modern design for roguelikes and Souls-likes are like, yeah, you are again, unless you're stuck on a boss in a Souls game without any way of like, you can always go grind, right? You can always go grind or find a different weapon, like start working on different builds, and bring something new to the table, or at least a new strategy. But and even sort of the meta argument would be like, the fact that you know better, the fact that you are trained makes it not just the same thing over again, because you have new skills now, right? Like you have even just a small, like, oh, I need to avoid that now, bit of knowledge that you bring forward each time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it does apply. That's why I like the word so much. But as it applies here. But so other, again, the other things they have in common, just, I mean, there's so many things they have in common. Also depends on the game too, right? Like some have more in common with each other than others, but I think all of them kind of have that idea I mentioned, where like variety comes from the gameplay, and as opposed to the content itself, for the most part. Obviously at different levels of extremes depending on both the genre and the games, right? So in general, Souls-likes have more content because you have more forward momentum than you do with roguelikes. But then you have games like Returnal, which actually have a fairly large amount of content, even for a roguelike. So, yeah. So, cool. Differences, contrasts, where they differ. I think it's kind of most notable, again, from sort of a more industry meta level. Souls-likes came out of the AAA space. I mean, From Software was a AAA developer. They made Armored Core. They made Kingsfield. They made Lost Kingdoms or Rune. They were already a popular and highly prolific game developer, and we'll talk about their history when we talk about them before Elden Ring comes out. But yeah, I mean, again, since Souls-likes are a little bit easier to track their origins, came right out of AAA space, very in direct contrast to that, roguelikes not only so Souls-likes were like, they came out of the AAA space and were immediately popular. Rogues came out of the indie space. ASCII, like Rogue was an ASCII game, like like. You could probably explain ASCII better than I could, but like it's like a web language, right?
Yeah, ASCII is the characters. There's encoding. So in code, there's a number, and ASCII is a specific mapping of numbers to characters on a keyboard, or in the English language.
Exactly.
Sorry. So like if you do a mathematical calculation, you end up with 36. That 36 like maps to A on the keyboard, and so ASCII is that encoder. But when we use it in this context, it's just like a picture made out of characters that can be rendered because of numbers. And so that's the tie from like ones and zeros going into, it's crazy fascinating.
No, it is. It's super fascinating that they're able to make games out of it. So, but totally grassroots, right? Like this is not, this is not some major developer making this game. This is like definitely dudes who are like just having fun in their basement. And it took a long time for these games to gain traction, right? Like, I mean, Returnal was in many ways one of the very first, if not the very first to my knowledge, truly AAA 3D roguelike, where it was huge budget. And even then it was Housemarque, which was not like, at the time, it was not a PlayStation studio. It was still very much a smaller studio. So yeah, they've been popular for decades, but they're also just now gaining traction in the mainstream space. So it really is like a grassroots genre, as opposed to Souls, which kind of has always been AAA. But it's just, I do think that contrast is one of the things that's really interesting about them from a meta level. From a game design level, Souls do tend to be a little bit more modern, right? 3D, once again, Dark Souls was a 3D action RPG. And Rogues tend to be, again, coming from that arcadey and also indie space, they tend to be more old school. So they tend to be platformers, isometrics, and they also, even in modern days, they tend to be more light on the graphical fidelity, whether that's like Hades, where it's very cartoony, or whether that's like Dead Cells, which straight up looks like it's like pixelated on purpose.
Right.
Stylistically, you have a lot more fast and loose with that.
Yeah, Returnal was one of the first, one of those to like break the trend.
Exactly, right, exactly.
That,
which makes Returnal so interesting.
What was it, Necro Dancer? Dance of the Necromancer or something?
Crypt of the Necrodancer, I think.
That's it, Crypt of the Necrodancer. And then we had like Spelunky, and you said Dead Cells, and we had Hades. Those are all like indie games that have the same kind of pixelated 16 8-bit graphics that they want. That was part of the direction of the art design. When the original Rogue in 1980, we had better looking video games than ASCII representation. So like if you go and look at a screenshot of the 1980 Rogue, it is a bunch of dashes and asterisks and ampersands
so
making a level. And there was no reason for that to be the case. It could have looked like, like Mario was made in 1982, and so the like Pitfall for Atari, for example, had an actual sprite that was animated. A lot of Atari games did. So yeah, at that time, like Rogue really was even elementary in it. So like the roguelike genre being more elementary in its graphical prowess, if you will, it's funny that we still kind of kept that forward. That still exists today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, cool. And then finally, my last kind of like contrast there's lots of ways you can compare and contrast these games. They have so many similar elements and then also so many great differences. But the kind of ones I want to kind of hit on, like, again, from a more high bird's eye view, in regards to their recursion, in regards to their repetitive gameplay, rogues are almost always more punishing, like more overwhelmingly punishing in regards to overall recursion, but less punishing, I think, in their moment-to-moment gameplay, because they want you to get farther. They want to dangle that carrot on the stick. They want you to go, oh, I just want to do one more run. I think I can get it this time. One more run. So I think their moment-to-moment gameplay, like there's, in the experience I've had so far with roguelikes versus souls-likes, there has not been a single boss in any of these roguelike games that I have struggled with as much as a souls-like. Meaning that, like, I think that the bosses tend to be less punishing kind of as a representation of that moment-to-moment gameplay, because you have to do the whole run all the way up to that boss. So none of the bosses in Returnal gave me as much problems as any boss not any boss, but like many of the harder bosses in Souls-like games. That ceiling, I suppose, is way higher because you have to go so far to get to them each time, comparatively. Mm-hmm. Whereas the opposite, I think, is true in Souls-likes, right? They give you way more progression. It lets you keep way more between each quote run or death. You have checkpoints. You literally don't have to run as far. Most of them have checkpoints that are like more or less right before the boss. Mm-hmm. But the individual encounters, whether that's leading up to the boss or leading up to that checkpoint or the boss itself, those tend to be way more harder because they have more focus, because you can do them over and over with more efficiency than you can a roguelike. So I think that's kind of a notable difference there. So
interesting.
Yeah, that's from speaking from experience. I'm sure there are exceptions to all of those things, but that tends to be the trend that I've noticed.
I mean, I did know that we played Enter the Gungeon on our Twitch channel for a pretty good long amount of time, and we accomplished nothing.
Yeah. Well, actually,
like nothing.
That's what I want to get to. That's a great segue, because my next question is, what are the pitfalls, downsides, controversies surrounding the original question said these two genres? We talked a lot about the controversies surrounding Souls-likes in our last episode. Apparently inspired someone to consider something for their own game, which is an awesome story that I can't wait to talk about in more detail. But let's focus on roguelikes this time and talk about what are kind of the downsides, I think, of specifically roguelikes. Obviously, they're going to have some of the similarities with the difficulty, but I think that specifically that repeating over and over again, depending on the game and depending on its level of punishment, like that can be so. It can be demoralizing, but not just in the sense of like, oh, I'm so pissed off, I'm gonna shut this game off and just leave, right? Like that's or quit forever, rage quit, right? Like, but I think even your example of Enter the Gungeon between the two of us, neither of us was willing to take that game seriously as something that we wanted to invest time in because it felt so arcadey, right? Like, yeah, like that's the downside of the arcadey callback to this genre, is that like arcade games are like by today's standards, back in the day, like they were all we had. So of course we invested hours and hours into mastering them. Nowadays, It's like, okay, I'm going to go home and just have a satisfying experience with the wall of games that I have and not mess around with this thing that just feels like an arcadey, repetitive, just, gimmicky kind of game. I think roguelikes more than Souls-likes actually suffer from that particular problem of being able to be dismissible because of their design, as opposed to just like that. I mean, that's what I mean by demoralizing in that context. It's not demoralizing in this case, isn't always like I'm so ticked off, I'm just going to rage quit. That's actually closer to Souls-likes. I think roguelikes are easier to just dismiss entirely and be like, whatever, this is something fun you do with your buddies. You each take a turn every time you die, right? But you're never going to take the game seriously.
Right.
I think that they suffer more from that kind of pitfall than anything else. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's actually interesting. Well, the biggest pitfall is, for me personally, I told you earlier in this episode that I am frustrated with them because they're good games and I want to complete them, and I don't want the difficulty to get in my way. So that's
Hades.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Hades.
And I have no aversion to playing Hades other than just like my backlog is huge. Like I would totally play Hades like today if I
Hades is one that you can finish the game. But even I played hours and hours of Hades and still hadn't unlocked the like final prologue, and therefore I believe there's a trophy associated with it on the PlayStation version. So I think part of me was like, oh, the PlayStation version's coming out. I guess I'll go for it on that, because like there's no reward for me on doing it on the Switch, and I just feel like I'm gonna keep investing hours on this and maybe eventually get the freaking prologue, when I'd rather, if I'm gonna maybe get something, I might as well get a trophy out of it. So there was definitely that feeling as well. So there's still a lot of content that you do have to kind of grind out even in that game, but by the end it feels more grindy, like you would grind in any other game, right? As opposed to like I'm just blasting through it, as opposed to just like blasting through the same content, but no longer is it hard and challenging in the same way that it was when you first started.
That can be oddly satisfying. But yeah, it's a good segue into the padded content of just like it feels longer. You're doing the same thing. You're in the same world. It has the same thing. You do it. It's tiny. If you didn't die, if you removed death from the game, like if you added an invincibility mode cheat, you could just wipe through the game in like 3 hours, 2 hours tops.
Not in Hades, not even like that. I said, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Yep.
Like Returnal, those 6 biomes, you could crush it in like an hour and a half if you never died. If you had invincibility and you could just do what you wanted and run through it really fast. That's the content. You could see the entire story, the entire game, hour and a half to 3 hours tops. Like that's all it is. So it is an actual shallow in content, but it's deep because of the constant recursion, repetition,
the gameplay,
whatever you want to call it. Yeah, the gameplay loop.
And just like the gameplay as in like what you can control usually is interesting, which is the point that I made earlier. So I won't repeat it here, but I won't recursion here. But but you're right. The actual content itself, like there's not that much enemy variation, because what the variation usually comes in the combinations of enemies you face and in what order, which is interesting, but there's definitely, I agree with your argument that like, well, but yes, at the end of the day, they're still the same enemies in a different order. Like I can see that is valid criticism. It's like one of those where like you can't fault it, but you also can fault it, right? Like you can be like, you're like, guys, that was kind of cheap, but also I see what you did there, so I can't fault you too much, but also come on, guys.
Yep.
Yeah.
Another kind of controversy surrounding the roguelike genre is the roguelike with a K versus the roguelite with a T thing debacle. And apparently the roguelite is the one that has a meta progression system.
Yep.
Because it's like a rogue, but it's a little easier because you're carrying something forward with each run. Where the original rogue, you carried nothing forward. So just that like kind of progression between runs changes it from a roguelike to a roguelite. It is a very minute change for like the games in the same genre. To me, they're the same genre.
No.
They're the same.
I think most people would agree. Really, it's only the absolutely most pedantic people within the community that would fault you for the incorrect there. Those same pedants exist in the Souls-like community, right? Like, there's actually also Souls-like with a K and Souls-light with a T.
Is it really?
Yeah, technically, like Jedi Fallen Order would fall into the Souls-light.
Oh, yeah, it makes sense. And so God of War.
Right, yeah. God of War as well. Well, and there's discussion about that, but I think I had a pretty good argument that I was like, because this came up recently, and I was like, we need to get more used to saying like Souls-inspired or whatever, because God of War used to be a Devil May Cry clone, as far as its combat went, at least. And they very clearly made a distinct choice to change the combat to look very much like Souls, a little different, but very much like Souls after the success of Souls, a decade later almost. And that was intentful. Someone's like, well, but like even Dark Souls took their like lock-on mechanics from Zelda for like third-person melee combat. And I was like, yeah, but like God of War didn't copy Zelda. Like Zelda came out long before God of War did. Yeah. They didn't copy Zelda. They copied what was popular at the time, which was Devil May Cry. So then when popularity shifted to Dark Souls, they clearly changed up their design. So yeah, it's very much, I only bring it up because there are pedants within the community who want to like be pedantic about it. But the reality is it's like, we need to get used to being okay with there being exceptions within the genre, because like that's how genres evolve. That's how we get new genres in the first place. Because one could argue that Souls does nothing different than games, or Souls does very little that's actually like unique. It's the combination of those elements, right? Like it gets their lock-on mechanics from Zelda, it gets their combat from the vast rich history of third-person melee games that came before it. It gets, the loss of currency from freaking Sonic, right? Like you lose your rings, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
Go pick up your body. That comes from Diablo, right? Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like it gets all of its elements you can trace back. It's the combination of those elements wrapped up within a great experience. And I think circling back around to roguelikes, that's how, it applies as well. Is like none of these individual pieces are necessarily unique. It's the combination of them that sort of define the genre and make it applicable to a whole bunch of other additional genres too.
Mm-hmm.
So cool. We can skip the next question because we talked about that in the last one. Do these need a name change? Yes. Roguelike is a stupid name and I'm sick of saying it.
Yep.
If you got sick of hearing me and Termite say roguelike throughout this episode, just know that we agree. And Souls-like. Like, give us an actual proper description for these games, for these genres. So we won't rehash that discussion. So that leaves us with our last question. What would you like to see from the genre going forward? And before you say that make roguelikes that are easier, I counter you with saying play Deathloop then, because Deathloop is a very recent example of a game with heavy roguelike elements that is widely considered to be very approachable.
Yeah.
By the vast majority of gamers.
I don't want to play that. I would. Yeah. 15 to $20.
I mean, it's a freaking Game of the Year nomination. I absolutely want to play Deathloop. I'll pay full price for Deathloop. I just, it's the holidays, so I'm waiting to see what people get me. And then if I don't get it, then I'll put it on my list to snag either on sale or just whenever it's convenient, because I want to play Deathloop and I'm willing to pay for it. It's just right now it's fallen in such a point where I've got other things to play and I don't want to rob someone of the opportunity of getting it for me at this specific time of year. When you said you wanted more approachable Souls-like games,
that's it.
I was excited to get here to this question on this episode so I can throw Deathloop in your face.
Yeah. Hey, I'm willing. Just got time, resources. It's time. That's it.
Well, but is there anything else? Is there any other ways you would want to see this genre evolve beyond just
of course. Yeah, I want easy modes added to all of them. I want like I have a kid and a 9 to 5. That's what I want.
I'm talking about. Okay, fine. Whatever.
Even Returnal. I wanted I wanted save mode added, which they did, but it would be awesome to be like no death checkpoints. So you die in biome 3, you start in biome 3 with what you had. Like that's it. That'd be awesome.
Yeah,
you want the true experience, you can have it. But here's the easy mode, and don't tie trophies to it.
Ironically, if they had done that, they would have made it. It would have made it feel more like a Souls-like, I think. But really? You could have lost everything still, right? Like that's where it could have met the middle ground, right? I think that I agree. Actually, this is a point at which I agree with you.
Hey,
I think that Returnal could have, if you still lost everything, Returnal could have very easily melded the two genres of Souls-like and roguelikes in a really interesting way. That said, that's kind of how it works, though, right? There were shortcuts to all the biomes. So when you died and went back to the beginning of your checkpoint, depending on where you were in the story, you could pretty much skip right next to the biomes. And there was incentive to, quote, farm the previous biome, as we talked about many times, which is more advantageous, going right ahead or farming the current biome. But you do have that ability to kind of go right, if you die in biome 2, you can go right to the portal pretty quickly from biome 1. And don't have to fight the boss over again. So there's
I was pretty surprised at how quickly I got through biome 6 when I was going back. After you beat the game, it's not really a spoiler. When you beat the game the first time, which is 6 biomes, you unlock the ability to find one collectible in each of the 6 biomes. And so to get the secret ending. So you have to go back through all 6 of them again. So you have to beat the last boss. Then you have to do that, beat the last boss again. And then to grind more stuff, I had to beat the last boss a third time. I don't know exactly why, but basically getting from 1 to 6 or from 4 to 6, because you have a checkpoint in the middle, was surprisingly quick by the time I was done with all that. And I guess the only thing that had changed was I was increasing the stuff in the weapon pool and upgrading those things.
And your skill, Termite.
Maybe.
You were better at the game than you were when you started. You knew how to avoid things.
Well, 40 hours in, you're going to know how things behave. Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just can't help. I can't help myself because that's literally what the games... Again, talking about... I can really quickly just talk about innovations. I don't think I talked about this as much, but with Souls-likes, but I should have. The games teach you how to play them, right? Your knowledge and practice eventually pay off. They do. It's very Enneagram 5, to tie it into another recent episode. No matter, and I think I mentioned that that's what people, I think, intend when they say get good, is you will. It's more like a promise than a challenge, right? It's you will eventually figure it out. It just kind of requires patience and the willingness to come to it with an open mind. To really quickly answer the question, I think I can do it in less than a minute. I think I just want to see it applied to more genres, right? Like, give me a roguelike RTS where you control multiple units, but failure means you start over with nothing, right? Like, that would be interesting, right? There's just so many ways you could apply this. And, I want to see big budget experiences. I want to see little, small budget experiences. But now that games like Returnal and to a lesser extent Outer Wilds and even Majora's Mask, one could argue had some roguelike elements way back when, nascent roguelike elements in the AAA space. I would love to see just more experiences now that it's starting to become more popular. Like, let's encourage developers to explore that genre and apply it to their games as well. I think that would be what I like. And again, I don't know why. I couldn't tell you the exact reason why. Maybe it's because there's such a variety of roguelikes already in regards to difficulty. More variety already. But I want to see... I'm okay with less difficult experiences. Because for some reason, Deathloop being an easy roguelike didn't bother me as much as... I'm not that I'm bothered. Like, Jedi Fallen Order is, for all intents and purposes, a Souls-like. And it doesn't bother me that it's easy, because that's what the developers intended. I guess what bothers me is people insisting that, like, people make them all easy, where it's like, no, just let people have hard experiences who want to have hard experiences, because there's no other place to get that. You can go to the game store and there's a wall of games that are easy and approachable with difficulty settings. What about the people who want a challenge and don't want to feel tempted by the experience of being able to just drop the difficulty when it gets hard, right? Like, that's a different experience. Those are two different experiences, and to say that you can't have one of them because I don't want you to have that one, right? Like, because I want to have, I don't want to have that experience, seems a little, in its own way, it seems elitist. I don't know, whatever. I don't want to derail this conversation more than I probably already have, and maybe cut like half of this anyways. So, but for whatever reason, maybe I'm a hypocrite, I don't know. For whatever reason, easy roguelikes don't bother me as much as they do Souls-likes, and therefore, like, I don't care, whatever. Make them hard, make them easy. Just don't try to take the hard ones away from people because you're having a hard time with it. Like, it's my only thing. So just let them be what they are, what developers intend them to be. And beyond that, just start doing cool things with them is all I care about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's where I'm at with... So, listeners, Rogue fans, Rogue haters, what do you want to see from the genre? What do you think we failed to cover? What elements do you think that we just blatantly left out and should talk about? Or do you never want to ever hear the words roguelikes come out of our mouth ever again? Probably not going to happen, but we still want to hear that feedback. And Termite will once again remind you where you can share it if you have it.
Let us know what you feel about Returnal 2 DLC, Returnal 2 or Returnal DLC at 80bitpodsmash.com. You can find links to our social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit. We also have a Discord server in our show notes. You can find us there and live chat with us while you're gaming. You can also find us on twitch.tv/80bitpodsmash, where we have already gotten a couple of live streams in December out the gate. So go check those out. YouTube is also live and well, and those videos get exported to YouTube for on-demand consumption. So go check all of those things out. We also have links to our podcast platforms of your choice: Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, whatever you would like, all at 80bitpodsmash.com, 80bitpodsmash.com.
Awesome. Next week is New Year's. Longtime listeners should know what to expect by now from our New Year's episode. And new listeners, well, just tune in next week to find out how we at 80-Bit Podsmash celebrate the new year. It's nothing super special. We are going to do a retrospective on the gaming year and our own podcast year, and it should be fun and enjoyable and lighthearted. So join us then.
See you next week.